Welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show with me, Andrew Eborn, my very special guest, a regular here on the Andrew Eborn Show. I always look forward to our catch-ups. It's Errol Musk. How are we doing, Errol?
All right, thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
Now, we were looking last time at the life-work balance and talking about how people love their jobs. And in fact, you have to love your job, otherwise Elon would have sacked you anyway. If you don't want to work here, go home. So you've got to love your job. But it's about getting it right as well. I want to take you back to your childhood. Do you remember your very first job?
Yes, my very first job, I was 13 years of age, pretending to be 15. I managed to get a job at a department store, running for change on a Saturday morning. So I was like a sort of, in those days, coins were the real exchange, and you know, very few people walked around with £5 and things like that. So most transactions were coin, as you probably realize, and you know, considering that nearly everything cost less than two and six or something like that, you know, I mean, everything was 2 shillings or 1 shilling or 2 shillings or two and six. And running for change was quite a big thing. And you would run to the bank and they would have all the change ready. And that was my job. I was 13. I did that job. I pretended I was 15. And I'd put a jacket and tie on, and I would also stand at the door, the entrance door of this quite nice department store. And they'd call me to get changed, and I'd run in and come back with that. I got 10 shillings. I got 10 shillings every Saturday morning for doing that,
Right.
which is quite a lot of money. You know, you could buy a really decent shirt for 10 shillings. I mean, for 10 shillings you could buy a pair of grey flannels, or you could probably for 2 shillings, 20 shillings you get a
Right.
nice
Do
jacket.
you remember having got your first 10 shillings from having run for the change? Do you remember what you bought with it?
Oh no, I wouldn't have bought anything in a rush. I would have spent it very slowly. I mean, it only cost sixpence to go to the cinema. So, sixpence for the cinema, threepence for the bus. 10 shillings went a hell of a long way. And so, at the age of 13, having 10 shillings a week was put me in a much larger situation than other kids. And it really did, because some kids were richer, and so parents did give them money. But I think the sort of money that a kid would get would be two and six in those days, half crown.
Right.
And me having 10 shillings was quite a lot.
And
I worked for
who
that.
employed you? Who gave you that 10 shillings for
The
running the
first
change?
job was a company called the OK Bazaars, which was a staple sort of place, about 200 shops around the country. And this had a long-term effect. I started with them at that age, and I went on with them right through university. By the time I was in university, I'd actually reached the stage where I was buying for them. So, for example, I run the gents section. They sold everything, from groceries to everything, to patio furniture to clothing for men and women. I was actually running the gents section in one of the biggest stores in Victoria by the time I was in university, and I'd go in on a Friday and do the inventory and buy stock, for them. So I was really grew with them, and by that stage I was getting probably about 50 shillings, or the equivalent of 50 shillings as a day. So it was a lot of money for me, and I was able to. In fact, I was going out with Maye from the time she left school. So
Right.
she was still at school.
How did you meet May? You're talking about May. How did you meet her?
Well, I met Maye when she was 10 years of age. She was 10 years old. She was in grade 5 of Senate 3, and Senate 3, I don't know what we call it, you called it, but we were grade 5, I suppose. And I was in grade 7, and I'd come from England to that school, and I joined that school halfway through grade 7, and she was in grade 10. And that's when I first came across her. And then she went to the same high school as I did. And I saw her over the years. And in fact, I went out with most of her friends, not her. But when she was in matric, I started going out with her, and we were just totally one person from then
Right.
onwards, you know. And
Do
Elon
you
was
remember? Do
born.
you remember your first date?
Oh yes, of course. And we went to see the African Queen, and yeah, no, I'll never forget that. And Elon was born 9 months and 2 days after we were married, you know, so gives you some idea. And you know, and no, we she's changed, and she blames me for a lot of things, and I probably was at fault these days. She speaks badly of me, but it's not really true the things she says. But you know, I give her a lead and say whatever you want. I don't mind. But
It,
for
it,
many
it,
years, we were one person.
I know, and it's glorious, and people always forget that. They always forget the bad, the good times when the troubles come, and troubles come in a lot of relationships. Um,
Yes.
we always, and it's always tough when any relationships fall down. It must be much harder when it falls down in the public eye. How do you cope with that?
Well, it's very hard. I mean, you know, I remember after May and I divorced, May and I had been at the top of the social, you know, scene, top of the political scene, top of the financial scene in South Africa. We were still in our 20s when we lived in probably one of the five or three or four finest houses in Pretoria, which is the capital city. That home today, that home was for some years the headquarters of the United Nations for the Southern Hemisphere, and right now it's the home of the European ambassador in South Africa. It's still the same, and we lived there. That's where Elon grew up, and I bought that house when I was 26 years old. So you know, I obviously did quite well, and so I was able to do that. So as a result, we were hit at the top of the financial scene, top of the social scene, top of the political scene as well. And um, when we split up, a man who worked for me in my practice for many years, a very fine man, Errol Heron, um, I was very upset after we were broken, after we divorced. And I was sitting in my office one day, and I had these beautiful offices, and everything seemed to be worthless after May had gone, made no sense anymore. And he came into me and he said, "Look, Errol," he was 20, he was always, no, he was about always much older than me. He must be 35 years older than me. And he said to me, I hired him because he'd been an engineer working in the government. And as a result, he was a very experienced man to work as a clerk of works for us. In other words, he would go and administer buildings all over the country. Anyway, he came in and he said to me, "Errol," he also happened to be a city councillor of Victoria. He became a city councillor. Anyway, he came to me and he said to me, "Errol, you have to realize," and he used his hand and he raised his hand. He said, "You were all these years right up here, and now you're," and he put his hand right down my shoe and he said, "Now you're right down there. Get used to it."
Oh dear. And why was that? Because you were together all
Well,
that time and now no longer
when you
together?
when you get divorced in a situation like that, you know, all the social nicety that you were up there and all the other things all just fall away, and
Right.
you're suddenly not so popular anymore. You're sort of thrown onto a sort of heap. I think it happened to her as well. You know, we no longer were the in people, and so it was very hard, and it took me a long time to recover. It took me about 10 years to get back to that same sort of situation, and I imagine that happens to a lot of people, and that's why I tell people, you know, that I meet women sometimes that are unhappily married or feel that they're unhappily married, and I'll say to them, "So, who bought you this Mercedes you've got outside? This beautiful Mercedes?" And she'll say, "Oh, my husband." I'll say, "Well, you know, when you get divorced, the next guy's not going to buy you a packet of chips." That's how much he's love you. He may buy you a packet of chips for the first 3 days, but not more than 3 days.
Right.
So I think you better reassess your circumstances, lady. You know, and when you drive away in your 300S or whatever it is, you know, and so yeah, people don't realize the society is built up, or used to be very much built up, on the family, the marriage, and you see this to a large extent in American politics. A death knell in American politics is to have a beard.
Right.
or a moustache.
Okay. So you grew both just
Anything.
on principle.
You have to look just like Andrew Eborn, you
Ah,
see.
yes, quite right too.
And then you've got it made. And then you have to have this perfect home life. You have to have these children that are exemplary examples, and then you are okay. I'm not even talking about the political scene. I'm talking about the business scene.
Yes.
You know, they're a very, that's the way it's got to be. And if it's not like that, you're going to have trouble. And and it's very much like that. I don't know. I imagine in England it could be the same. Here, things are a little more fluid these days, with so many people either marrying late or divorcing early.
Yeah.
So things have gone a little bit skew in recent years, in the last 20 years, I'd say, since the 2000s. But certainly in times gone by, divorce and things like that did not sit well with your company that you work with.
Sure.
If you
And
came
it's
in
and you make an excellent point as well, Errol, because a lot of people, but they'll be watching this, going through a similar situation where they've been married for how long are you married to May?
May and I were together for 16 years.
I mean, long time. So they would have been married for a long period of time, and you develop friends which you jointly have, and those friends get their loyalty split, don't they? Did you find that?
Well, yes, that's very. Oh, yes, absolutely. You as a single person, you're now a threat, really, in some respects, I would imagine. But it's a disease in those days. You don't want that disease in your family, so you don't want some bloke who's just got divorced popping in, and certainly you don't want some young, good-looking woman coming in saying, "I'm divorced now." So to get after your husband or something. No. But it was not only the family, it was not only your friends, it was to do with your whole position in society.
Right.
So if you move over to the political realm and you start talking about standing for office where you are, going to be voted in, or it need not be political, it could be the country club, for example. It could be a lot of things. It could be the local town group or something like, I don't know, something like that. They want you to be, certainly in those days, they want you to be a married, settled man, fits a certain mold, and not some sort of, gallivant or some sort of, adventurer or something like that. They want you to be quite predictable. And I look back in those days and I look at how nicely you dress and how poorly I dress, these days. And you never went to the cinema without looking the way you do.
Right.
In those days. I mean, that's how you went to the cinema with your wife in the evening. If you went anywhere, if you went to a restaurant, you dressed like you are now. And just about anywhere. You went to work like that, of course. And you never went anywhere without looking very dressed. And as a matter of fact, I noticed this recently, or not recently, about 5 years ago. I was in Washington, D.C., and I mentioned this to you the other day. Trump was playing at one of the golf clubs, and I was
Yes.
invited to this club. And it's the Burning Tree Golf Club, which only has males as a member, which is one of the few places that have kept that sort of thing, only men. But of course, for socials and the restaurant, everything, they do have women coming there. But anyway, it's a very, very exclusive golf club. You have to be sort of the president of America to be a member or something, because all the presidents were members. But anyway, I was there and he was playing golf. That's when I happened to have the opportunity to greet him. But
Yes.
apart from that, that's not that important. I went there for lunch one day with two senators and the father of my daughter's husband, who is, as I have told you on a previous episode, they own the Half Moon Hotel in
Yes.
Jamaica and so on, very wealthy people. Anyway, and there was a sign at the entrance to this fabulous restaurant which said, in burgundy with gold lettering, so of course, nothing off, no half-fish, burgundy sign framed in gold lettering. What did it say again? Sneakers, sports jackets, and jeans are not considered proper attire.
Right.
So everybody's, of course, unless you're in golf clothing, golf
Yes.
clothing is another thing, But if you arrive, you have to be dressed in a tie and jacket, as I was, for this lunch. So that still happens there. Unfortunately, here it doesn't happen so much anymore, and it's a pity more than anything, I'd say. So anyway, coming back to divorce and stuff, when you are a married man and you fit a certain sort of thing, the wife, the children, a lot of time it became private schooling or semi-private schooling in South Africa was also on the go. You were expected to be look and behave in a certain way. Suddenly you're divorced. It's not the same for people anymore.
Right.
And so for me, it was a very big jump. And as I said, Harold Heron, bless him, one of the finest men I've ever known, said to me, Errol, you better get used to this. Was about 3 months after the divorce.
Right.
In my office, he came in and he said, you used to be here. And he raised his hand to the ceiling, you see. And then he put his hand, a very wise man. He was much older than me. I think I was 30 and he was about 65. But anyway, and he put a very smart man. And he put his hand down by his shoe, in his very polished shoe. Of course, he always wore a jacket and tie,
Right.
And he put his hand down by his very polished brown shoe and said, now you're here. Get used to it.
You're laughing about it.
The best lesson I ever had.
Yeah. Oh, well, I think that's probably right. But you're laughing about it now. But I think a lot of people in a similar situation feel completely lost. Because as you say, you were like one unit doing this whole social life, the whole
it's a terrible,
overnight.
terrible thing to happen.
Yeah.
Terrible thing to happen.
You mentioned
it should never have happened.
No, and well,
it should never have happened in our case.
Why do you think it happened?
Because, people, as we discussed on a previous episode, people are always full of new ideas. We were talking about these organizations like England and Keir Starmer and these people who want to try and control what people say and everything in England. You can't do that to people. You can't even control your own children. Let's get real. Keir Starmer can't even control his own children if he's got any. So, I'm not even going to say good luck to you because you're not going to have any luck in that direction. So people have all new ideas all the time. And it's a very, very hard job to remain focused and dedicated and all that sort of stuff. You've got all these sort of, especially, well, one wants to say in the era in which we live, but I think it's always been like that for hundreds of thousands of years. There's all these new things that are coming in all the time at you. And people are by nature have ants in their pants, if you understand that expression.
Yes.
They've all got ants in their pants. And so it's a very wise person who's perhaps had a very good upbringing or something who is able to handle that kind of thing and stay focused on what they have in their lives. And so a lot of people move, and these days it becomes easier and easier. In fact, before 1980, getting divorced was a very difficult thing. And Maye has actually written about it in her book that she wrote. And that is that before 1980, you had to have a reason to get divorced. You couldn't simply go to a court and say, I want to be divorced. And I read about it at the time, in Holland and places like that, they would only grant, even if you had a good reason, they would grant you a 2-year probationary period. And if you still want to get divorced after 2 years, because it was so serious, it was such a serious damage to society, divorce, that you had to come back after 2 years and say, I still want to get divorced. And of course, many people didn't come back. But in 1980, they changed that. And in 1980, a law came out all over the world at the same time, and here in South Africa, which said, you don't have to have a reason anymore. You can now simply quote irreconcilable differences, right, and you can get divorced. And so people could now, and of course the magazines, Cosmopolitan and such like, were full of, why don't you get divorced? It's the new in thing, for the women. Of course, it's a rubbish magazine. Women love it, and full of, the latest ones, the ones I've seen, I haven't seen it for a long time, used to have titles like 54 ways of having sex and 102 ways of having positions in sex. This is now cosmopolitan. And are you having all your 102 positions, or are you being shortchanged? This is now cosmopolitan. So the women read this stuff and they say, I'm being shortchanged. I need to get divorced. And so Maye rushed off and found an attorney. And of course, when you arrive at the attorney, he doesn't say, are you sure about this? He says, how much are you worth? And she says, oh, we're worth this much. He says, oh, I don't know how you stayed married to that bloke for so long. And he says, oh, we'll get rid of him for you in no time. And that's what happens.
Yeah.
And so we were divorced very quickly. We were divorced in a matter of a week or so because I was connected with it.
Good heavens.
Yeah, she comes to me on Thursday. I knew all the judges, so I contacted them. I said, okay, she wants to be divorced. Can we have it on the next Wednesday instead of on the roll in 6 months' time? And they said, sure. So the judge put me on the roll for the following Wednesday, and boom, she was divorced.
Good heavens.
And
but did you see it coming? I mean, you're talking about it now.
I was totally
surprised.
Totally shocked. I had no idea, and I was totally surprised. But my attitude was, well, if that's what you want, and I've been like that ever since. I've always been like that with women. If a woman starts saying I don't like it, well, then I say, well, fine, let's drop it.
Right.
I think a lot of men. I've seen a lot of my friends over the years at school and after school at university. One man shot himself, because of women. This man looked like James Bond, and his girlfriend dropped him, and he shot himself at the age of 22. And no, I think you have to learn to not put up with that kind of thing. You have to try and be stoic about it. Of course, you take it. I still took it as a tremendous shock. So even though I was divorced in a week, I took it as a tremendous shock. I mean, I tried to hide it. In fact, it wasn't 2 or 3 months. I lived in this fabulous home. Thank God, I still kept the home. I gave her our other home, which was in Natal, in a place called La Lucia in Durban, also a magnificent home. She took that home over, and I kept our home in Pretoria. And the church that I went to the priest said to me that I had it wasn't 6 weeks, 2 months after the divorce. Of course, everybody knew about the divorce. And then Maye used to be a Sunday school teacher at that particular church. And he said to me, you seem to have handled this divorce so well. Do you mind ministering or not ministering or counseling, whatever the right word is, to some of my parishioners who are not handling their circumstances so well? And there were quite a lot of them were getting divorced because of this new law that came in. And I said, no, sure, I'll most happily do that. And so these men started coming around. I said, send men around for breakfast. So within about the next 2 or 3 months, there were like 10 to 15 men coming to breakfast with me every morning. And I would try and give them a pep talk. And so from the priest's point of view, I seem to be handling it very well. In fact, I wasn't handling it very well at all. I was doing better than the other guys, but I was not happy about it at all.
What did you say? What did you say for your pep talk?
Well, we took to calling it a sort of prayer meeting. So we would take passages. I would, that's all I could do because they would look to me for help. Some of them would just arrive at my house at any time of the day or night and just throw themselves on the couch or on the whatever was available and say, I can't go on. And so I would take to reading passages from Psalms and things like that to try and help them. One man in particular, who was a very famous lawyer in South Africa, he was quite a lot older than me. He must have been nearly 20 years older than me. He got divorced, and very wealthy man. And I helped him a great deal. And he owned a bush lodge in the most expensive so-called, the bush, what we call the bush, the where you get all the lions and tigers, lions and elephant and everything. And he had this wonderful place in the Timbavati, which is, almost unaffordable today. And he suggested I go down there with him with my 3 children, and I did. I took a girlfriend that I'd already found with me, although I was still suffering with the separation. Anyway, I went down there. We spent a week down at his place in the Timbavati. On the way back, he said, I can't go back. I can't face this anymore. I can't face it anymore. He was the leading medical lawyer, what they call medical law in South Africa. He was a very famous guy. He was the head of, he knew all about medical law, so-called. Anyway, on the way back, he said to me, I'm not going back. We were driving his three-seater Caravelle or something. You know, it was like a big van with 3 rows of seats. And he was sitting behind me. I was driving. And he said, I'm sorry, I'm not going back. And he just fell over dead in front of us all. You know, yeah, fell over dead. Kids were sitting there, Elon, Kimmel, and Tosca, reading the comics. And I pulled over and I said, Ken's dead, you know, and Elon and them said, yeah, he's dead there, don't worry. Went on reading their comics. The kids are like that. And
he said, yeah, Dad, he's dead. I carried on reading his comics. Good heavens.
Yes, they carried on reading. That's how children are. Elon was at the time 8 years old.
Right.
Kimmel was 7 and Tosca was about 5. And so
he died of a heart attack or a broken heart, or he took his own life?
He just dropped dead. He just dropped dead.
Right.
And he just fell over dead. And we tried everything to try and revive him, but it was because of his divorce.
Right.
And we then drove to the nearest hospital, which was at least 100 miles away. And then he was, you know, declared dead and you know, and so on. So that was the kind of man that was coming to see me. You know, he was coming to see me early in the morning, and he just said, I can't do it anymore. Sure. So the truth is that divorce was a terrible, terrible thing.
Right.
And nowadays people are more sort of, what's the right word? Inured to it? Is that the right word?
Yeah, well, I mean, you have social media now is sort of doing this sort of thing. You have programs where you can say married at first sight and so on and so forth. I mean, it makes it worse. And I have a lot of sympathy for people in the public eye, as they say, because not only do you have your private life held out and all your dirty linen aired in public, but people write books about it. And you said earlier, Errol, that a lot of things that Maye said about you were very hurtful and untrue. What things in particular were untrue in the book?
Well, you know, Maye has, we've been divorced for 44 years now, and she still talks now about how I beat her and I bruised her, and it was a total nonsense, absolute rubbish. I mean, there's, you know, Maye came from a family of sort of Puritan Americans or Quaker type people, you know, so they were very opposed to any kind of foul language. So I mean, in their company, you never said anything remotely foul, although generally speaking, people didn't use much foul language in those days. But you know, you never said, if you said oh God or oh Jesus or Jesus Christ or something like that, I mean, gee, that was just over the top. It was unacceptable. Never mind any of the more, you know, horrible words you can use. And so with Maye, I mean, if you said, oh, I had a hell of a day, she'd say, oh, don't swear like that in my company, you know. So I would say to her, well, hell, that's not a swear word. Oh, she says it is a swear word. And, you know, so you just didn't do it. So as far as beating her up and all that sort of thing, I don't think so. You know, she would have been at her mother in no time. No. We had a wonderful marriage, and but since then she's sort of convinced herself that things were not cozy. Or I don't know. It was absolutely ridiculous. The sort of thing. I mean, it wasn't a week or 2 weeks before we were divorced when she said to me, "I'm sure." She told people at a function that her and I would be together for the next 50 years. And so I was very puzzled by that, because it wasn't 3 weeks before she served divorce papers. I mean, she told people we were going to be together for 50 years. And so it was that new law that came out, and the Cosmopolitan magazine sort of suggesting to these women, are you getting your fair deal? Are you having the 54 ways? Does he does this to you? Does he do that to you? You know, are you given your own credit card? All that sort of stuff, you know. In fact, in our case, Maye handled all our credit cards. Right. I had absolutely nothing to do with the finances. She had everything. If I wanted to buy anything, I used to ask her if we had any money. Can we buy it? So it's really ridiculous.
So do you blame Cosmopolitan for the breakdown of the relationship?
I blame the propaganda that came, the media that came out at that time. In as much as I'm sounding very patronizing or I don't know, male or something, Women are far more influenced by the media than men are, I think. You can influence a man by showing a picture of Popular Mechanics and saying, do you have two Weber carbs on your car, or are you still stuck with only one? And he will go into a trance and be unable to speak for about 24 hours until it's Monday morning, and he can get to the workshops and find out how come he doesn't have two Weber carbs. If you understand the joke I'm trying to tell.
Yes, no, absolutely.
But men are not influenced by other things. So a man is not influenced by hearing that his buddy got divorced or something like that, or anything. That he's not interested in that kind of thing. Women, on the other hand, have their little committee friends. I call it a sort of committee. So they meet with their committee, and they compare notes with their committee each time. What's happening in their lives. Men most certainly don't get together and do that and start talking about what's happening in their lives, in their marriage. They get together and they say, England's going to lose if they don't do this and that,
Yeah.
I know, because I know everything.
It must still be, and I can tell from, I've spoken to you several times now, it's obviously still hurts a bit, doesn't it?
Yes, it hurts me because it was so unnecessary. On the other hand, I was able to remarry and have two girls that I can't imagine the world without.
Right.
Thinking of Alexandra and Rose, I can't imagine a world without them. So there's a reason for everything, as my mom would always say. There's a reason for everything, and so it's not the end of the world. I think that the whole marriage system maybe needs to be analyzed and look at the term marriage, a term marriage. You marry somebody for 10 years or something like that, and you enter into something so people can become aware of what they're doing. There was a very interesting article that came out when I was trying to understand this myself back in the 80s, which came out from the Oxford University, which stated that in the modern era, which is considered to be after the First World War, divorce has taken the place of death in life. So prior to the First World War, the Oxford University, a very interesting study said, before the First World War, people were very likely, who lived to the age of 70, were very likely to be married 4 times during their lifetime, for the simple reason that they would lose partners over that period of time. And if you went back and looked at people from that era, which I did at the time, people that I knew about, like, for example, Paul Kruger, who happens to be the great-great-great-grandfather of my second wife, he was married 4 times, and he lived to the age of 75. He was married 4 times. Then I looked at another one of our sort of local sort of people who were well-known, who's had places named after him, Potgieter. And he was married, as it happened, 7 times. But he lived to the age of something like 87. And he was married 7 times. And when you look at the history, having been a city councillor in Troy for a number of years, and these people's photos are all over the show, and they always refer to them with their last wife. In other words, the last wife becomes the wife they had, although the previous wives are sort of delegated to the dustbin or so. I don't know. But at any rate, so the Oxford University thing said that after the First World War, people started to enjoy longer lives. And so the likelihood of you following the same pattern was now going to be taken over by getting divorced. So that in general, if you look at the numbers of the way divorces are taking place, that around a period of 7 to 10 years, people are getting divorced and remarrying for another 7 to 10 years, and then perhaps remarrying for another 7 to 10 years. And I thought that was a very accurate sort of way of looking at it, because people, as they grow, change. And they're not the same at 20 as they are at 30, and they're not the same at 40. They change. In fact, if you take men, for example, many men, and especially the men I knew, would push themselves onto the careers that they seem to have handed to them. If their fathers had been lawyers, they'd become a lawyer. If their fathers had been this, they'd become that. And so they went, but it was not particularly what they wanted to do. Many of them, I think of one particular who became a world famous deep sea diver, recovering stuff from ships that had sunk at very great depths. He became very famous, Alan Fulton. He wanted to do that. And he had married the Miss Pretoria, or the Miss Jacaranda. She was the most beautiful girl imaginable. And he'd married this girl, and she was like every man in Pretoria, all his friends, including me. I don't like to use the word lusted, but we all sort of lusted after her. I mean, just to see her was, oh my God, as we were all single men. Anyway, Alan married this girl, you see, and eventually he divorced from her and became this, dropped the law thing totally. He said, if I never want to see another law book. And he became a very good lawyer.
Right.
He was a partner of one of the biggest firms, but he then became a deep sea diver. So a lot of people change as they go along, and they do the things that they would have liked to have done from the day they started, but they were forced to take over the dad's law practice and things like that. Not that they didn't like the job, but they felt they were not supposed to enjoy life. They were supposed to, or not enjoy life. They're not supposed to follow passions. Right. And I think the same thing could be said of women. Now, Maye was an extremely good-looking girl, probably one of the best-looking. In fact, one of our Miss Worlds, Penny Coolen, who we knew very well, said to me that Maye is the most beautiful woman she's ever met. And and she herself had been Miss World. Anyway, the thing is, Maye was often asked to do modeling when she was young, and she never did. She focused entirely on the children and our marriage. And when she reached the age of about 30, I started having her clothes made by the top fashion person in Johannesburg. I was a wealthy guy, and I was able to employ people like Pasquale, who was like well-known, like, and people like Penny Leroy. They were like these super fashionados and everything, to make Maye's clothes for her, And as a result, they started asking her whether she would like to model some of the clothes, because they did all these international shows and all that sort of stuff. And Johannesburg, of course, was at that time one of the premier places in the world. And so slowly she moved into this fashion world, and it started to change her. Right. And she started to like that kind of thing. It was a passion she had, and I kept her from that. And of course, she went on to the point that she's been on the cover of Vogue several times.
Yeah,
absolutely. At the age of 60.
A very, very famous model. Well, we're going to do a deeper dive into that. It's very good of you to talk. And I think a lot of people feel reassured hearing your experience. I always think those in the public eye who can talk about how devastating some of these things are. But it's important because there are lessons to be learned about changing and how you can cope. We're going to look a bit more about that sort of side straight after these messages.
Okay.